Otto kicked at a stone in the path and watched it skitter along in front of them. He kicked it again. He knew it was a childish thing to do, but he knew it was a childish thing. Damn it. Achoo! He kicked it again. He knew it was a childish thing to do, but he knew it was a He knew it was a childish thing to do, but he knew it was a childish thing. He knew. How did I miss this entire section? He knew it was a childish thing to do, but ever since they'd made it clear to the seers that they didn't want to join them on the grasslands, but wanted to move north along the coast instead, some of the seers had been openly hostile toward Atu's people. More seemed to be warming up to Paven, however. Perhaps this was one more way they could get back at Atu and Rika for not wanting their clan to be curved tusk hunters. It's like they believe we think we are better than they are, just because we want a different life than what they're offering us. They're acting like Puliks. They're acting like Puliks. Rika scowled, her hair falling across her face as she walked, staring at her feet like she used to do when her father was watching her. Let them play their games, Atu said. They reached a bend in the path. Around it, the ocean gleamed out on the horizon. Atu looked out over the bay. We will be fine without them. You and I can work together to try and discover what else we might be able to do with these gifts. We don't need them. We don't need them. I think a Shukat does want to teach us, Rika said. She sat down on a flat boulder overlooking the water. I wish I could go out in a skin boat today, Atu said. We can figure something out later. I'm too angry at the seers right now to think things through. I thought seeing the water would help me, but it's just made me angrier. Let's go. Atu and Rika walked back to their cave in silence. Atu and Rika walked back to their cave in silence. Atu awoke with his eyes burning and his head pounding as if someone... Whoops. Oh, I don't need 50 seconds. One. Lens. Atu awoke with his eyes burning and his head pounding as if someone were trying to break it open, like the women break open the mussels on the beach rocks. This is the third time you've had a headache like this since we came off the ice. Rika placed a cool, wet hide on the back of Atu's head where the rock had hit him over a moon ago.
It worries me that this injury is still causing your pain.
Must have been a big rock that hit me. Atu mumbled, then shut his eyes again against the light coming into the cave. I need to get up, go with the rest. They're hunting the paddle antlers to the north. I need to see the fiery mountain. You're going nowhere, mighty hunter. Rika's voice was firm. As your healer and your woman, I'm telling you. Most of the Ice Mountain clan and Great Frozen clan men were going on a hunt. Bruna would guide them through the forests to the north to hunt the paddle-antlered animals that lived just east of the Fire Mountain. They needed food, and the further they hunted away from the canoe people, the less likely they were to be seen. The other seer hunters had volunteered to guard all the women and children, although no one had seen the strangers venture any further north than their camp. Atu suspected what the seers really wanted was time to talk among themselves without the others interfering. Tempers were still flaring among the hunters of all three clans. Some hunters wanted to go, others to stay and meet the strangers, trade with them. A few of the younger hunters of all three clans expressed an interest in possibly trading for some of the strangers' women. Atu had seen the look of jealousy on Bruna's face. Strangers' women. Atu had seen the look of jealousy on Bruna's face whenever Atu was with Rika. Hunters were watching each other with suspicion and holding their women close. Atu wasn't the only one concerned that violence might erupt among them at any time. A Shukat had suggested the hunters go, and Bruna had volunteered to show the Expanse clan hunters the way.
What?
Atu had hunters the way. Atu had been eager to go also, to see the mountain he had dreamed of, and to see these animals, which were smaller than Tuskies, but still very large. The seer hunters said they usually came this far south in the winter, staying near the hot springs and grass that grew all winter long in the shelter of the Fire Mountain, having their young in the spring, then moving north again. They had once been a main food source for the seers, but when the other Expanse clans began coming off the ice, and they had enough men to hunt the Tuskies, the seers grew to scorn the paddle antlers as being unworthy of them. They preferred the tusked animal meat, even though Bruna admitted that the paddle horns were much smarter. And much faster, Tingyok had declared. Sometimes the smallest fish can be the most worthy game, for it is quickest.
Shut up, Atu.
Worthy game, for it is quickest, Atu had said, but Bruna hadn't seemed to agree with the old Nuvik saying. He'd scowled at Atu and Nuvik saying. He'd scowled. He'd scowled at Atu and Tingyok and turned to make preparations for the hunt. And I say that every day we linger here is a greater chance the strangers will discover us. We need to leave now. Ashukat stood at the central fire in front of the caves, surrounded by his people. For once, most of the other men of the clan were seated and listening as the elders of the Seer clan argued among themselves. Atu sat off to the side. The conversation had awoken him, and although his head still throbbed with the beating of his heart, he had slipped into the group to listen. Always before, the clans have come off the ice and we've sent them out as the weather warms and the herds begin to move north and east. But this time, the strangers have come. This is not good. We need to go now. Ashukat looked to the rest of his hunters. Ashukat looked to the rest of his hunters. I know some of you desire to wait, and few of you even to venture into the stranger's camp. But there is a danger there. Several of the other seers nodded. Do they feel danger? Atu wondered. Or are they simply going along with Ashukat because he is one of them, and their leader? Ashukat looked at Atu. His face was a mask, as if Atu himself were now a stranger to him. All because I wish to go north and not east with his clan. The arguing continued among the seers until Atu's head began throbbing again. Atu turned away from them and sought the darkness of the cave and his warm furs. You have decided to leave, Ubuntu said, his voice strong at the central fire. The fire was small and made of wood that would not smoke, all precautions to keep themselves hidden, even though Atu suspected the fiery canoe people couldn't see their fire or smoke from their lower elevation near the ocean, even if they were watching out for others. And from what anyone had been able to tell, the canoe people hadn't ventured farther than necessary to cut the great trees they were using for their dwellings, and to fish a short walk up the river where it was easy to stand on flat rocks and spear or net them. The area around the fire was crowded. Women and children of all three clans were sitting in groups around smaller fires, and it appeared that all but the two hunters watching the strangers were present tonight. Yes,
What's that?
hear that? What is that? It's weird. Doop, 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 doop. Yes, we leave in 3 suns, a Shukat said. It will take that long to pack and ready ourselves for the journey. Stanek added, We'll move our women and children ahead of the tusked animals and leave only a few hunters to keep an eye on the herd from the safety of the eastern ridge, farther north. You found a good... You found a good spot to keep watch over them, then, Ubuntu said. Kinnak told me he thought Bruna had. How will you know when and where the tusked animals begin to move north? Paven asked. We'll know, a Shukat said. Our watchers will be seers with gifts. Paven looked frustrated by his answer, but he said nothing. He wants to go with them, Atu realized. He's trying to show he can cooperate and not challenge everything a Shukat says. Bruna stood. The shadows from the firelight cast long, wavering shadows away from his lanky body and made him appear even taller. We have decided to take any one of your clans who wishes to come. Ubuntu, we welcome you and your hunters. You also, Paven, if you will agree to allow Stanek and a Shukat to lead without challenge. Paven looked as if he were about to protest, but held himself in check. Rovek and I will come. And I will follow Stanek. Atu saw the look of despair on Rovek's face. Mievu turned away into her mother's embrace, hiding her tears. As Rovek was not a hunter yet, he had no choice but to follow his father unless Paven allowed him to stay. Clearly, Paven wasn't going to. You don't even see what you're doing to your own son, and you agree to follow only Stanek. Not a Shukat. Atu looked to his father. Ubuntu held his gaze, his eyes sharp in the firelight. But he did not speak. Instead, he held his spear out to Atu, and then hit his chest. Atu's clan understood. A few of Paven's hunters scowled, but most of the other Ice Mountain hunters made the same motion toward Atu with their spears, fist thumping hard on their chests. It has... Stop. Go back. Hit his chest. A few of the seer... chest. A few of the seer hunters seemed surprised, but Atu's clan understood. A few of Paven's hunters scowled, but most of the other Ice Mountain hunters made the same motion toward Atu with their spears, fist thumping hard on their chests. It has been my desire to move north again, Atu said as he stood tall in the firelight. I believe I have been given our clan's destiny in my dreams, to live among the ice mountains along the coast of the great water you call the ocean, and to hunt there by boat in the warm seasons, and over the ice when it turns cold. We will not be coming with you. Ashuka. Damn. Ashukat spoke. Could your dream be a remembering of your people's past, as we remember our past? Are you seeing the past of your people, now that you are here where your people lived long ago? Perhaps being here has sparked deep memories within you. You may have the gift for seeing the past. If that is so, then you are not seeing your future at all. You need to come with us. Atu stood speechless. He felt foolish at the real possibility. Atu stood speechless. He felt foolish at the real possibility Ashukat was right, and he had only been seeing the past, not the future. And on the heels of embarrassment, he felt anger rising. He felt anger rising.
If you had been training me as you promised, Ashukat, maybe I would have known this might be a dream of the past, or at least I'd know how to tell the difference.
Atu felt his cheeks burning. He moved to sit, but Ubuntu put his arm around his son, holding him steady at his side. I believe my son may be seeing both, Ubuntu declared. I have pondered his dreams for many suns, and this is what I believe. I think Atu is seeing what was once, and what will be again. I think Atu is seeing what was once, and what will be again. All of Nuvekuna comes full circle, like the coming and going of the moon, the passing of the days, now the changing of the seasons, and over the great time in the here and now, the warming and the cold. Several of the older hunters of all the clans nodded in agreement. Suka stood. I do not see, he said, but I know this hunter, and have known him since we were Puliks fighting over a hide ball. This brought a grin from Minnie, and chuckles from the women. I don't know if he dreams of the future or the past, or both, Suka continued. All I know is that just because all other clans went out onto the grasslands does not mean we, the last off the ice, need to follow the others. As on the Expanse, probably only a small group of people can live in one large area in the far north. It makes sense to think this because game will be scarcer there than here. I believe we are the people destined to live there again. I know many others of our clan feel the same. We long to be near the land of our ancestors and of our named spirits. I am named for the fleetness of dry snow flowing over the ice, when the wind blows hard from the west and the snow is like moving water up to our knees. Where will I ever see my spirit again on the grasslands? Men and women of both Atu's and Paven's clans popped their lips in agreement. We will return north, Atu said.
But it is not safe to stay here with these strangers.
A young woman Atu recognized as being Bruna's sister, Keanu, stood in the shadows, her voice quiet, but insistent.
Have you not felt it, fellow seer? Something is wrong in this place, and since the strangers have come, it is growing worse every day. The animals are restless, and they flee the dark shadows of the black birds who came with the strangers, now flying among them. They sense a danger they cannot understand, for it feels like the time before a great storm, and yet no storm approaches.
Concerned questions and discussion broke out around Otto as everyone seemed to have something to say at once. Otto looked to the young woman, who shrugged and sat again. I'm sorry I won't get to know her, Otto thought. I would like to know more about the gifts she has, but I wish she hadn't decided that now was the time to speak up. Otto moved to sit beside Rika and began discussing with the hunters and their women now surrounding them. Some wanted to know more about his dreams, some about his plan to move north. How soon could they go? How long would it take to build enough skin boats? The seers would be leaving their boats behind. Several hunters suggested they use those skins, rework them onto the wider frames they would need. This would save time and much hunting. But how much time do we have? Otto thought of the skin boats now laying under layers of pine boughs, a few spear lengths into the forest. How long before small animals and the incessant dampness of this place ruin the boats we already have? The boats need to be put back on racks so my clan can remake them before the skins begin to rot. But then we could be so easily seen. What should we do? I don't know, Otto said aloud. Rika held his hand under the blankets, giving him strength as the people around him grew more and more anxious. Ubuntu moved to sit beside them also, and finally Otto said, Let's meet tomorrow, at first light. I need all of you to consider how we might keep ourselves safe and work to build the skin boats we need to move north. I agree we must stay hidden from the fiery canoe people if at all possible. We might be able to move our camp a few days north using the Seer clan's skin boats, where we can work on building the rest of them at a safer distance from the strangers. Heads nodded. Then the sharp sound of snapping branches echoed through the clearing, and Otto and the others turned. Two shorter men stepped out from the trees, standing on either side of a huge man, dark and gleaming with tattoos that somehow caught the firelight and made his skin seem to dance. How did they get past the guards without being seen? Otto and the others raised their weapons as the two men lifted large objects to their mouths and blew into them. A blast of sound erupted into the clearing and echoed off the rock behind them. Women and children screamed in terror, and some ran into the shadows. Hunters stood, ready to defend the clans. Otto reeled at the sound, clapping his hand on the back of his head over his old injury as it erupted in pain. I bring no evil. The tattooed man said in a heavily accented voice. He stepped further into the firelight, his arms up to show he carried no weapon. Believe I this greeting? He smiled, and Otto felt his heart lurch and the ground shift beneath him. If he hadn't been sitting already, he would have fallen. His head throbbed and his heart pounded. Otto had never seen anyone who looked like this man. The stranger's face was completely tattooed. Somehow the artist who had done it had been able to create the look of a large bird with a hooked beak, deep-set eyes, and what seemed to be feathers drawing back into the man's hair, which was short around his face and standing straight up. All down the man's body were tattoos of what seemed at first to also be feathers, but as Otto looked, he saw strange symbols which also seemed to move as the man breathed, as if his skin were a live animal he was somehow wearing. Otto felt his flesh crawl. The man smiled again. I bring no evil, he repeated. I bring no evil, he repeated. The man smiled again. I bring no evil, he repeated. I bring no evil.
Alright, that was it. Get out of my house.